Everyone, thank you for joining us today on our webinar, which will talk about 1031 strategies and how to defer taxes, and really the power of this platform and what that can do to investors and owners of properties. Like, specifically today, our focus is hospitality and hotel properties, but really this transcends to any other asset class at the same time. So welcome. Today, what we are doing is we are going to be understanding how to leverage 1031 strategies and to defer taxes, and also to make sure that that enhances our investment returns, specifically for hotel owners, but even for any other investors that are participating in this webinar today. So the main reasons I think why hotel owners should consider 1031 exchanges is, we have a great guest speaker who's going to go in depth, talk about the rules and the strategies and all that. So for me specifically, I feel that not only 1031 exchanges offer a tax deferral strategy where you can avoid paying capital gains taxes today, which goes into future, and there's other strategies that are involved there, which our guest speaker will talk about, but also to maximize growth and understand that these exchanges that are available to us and to investors, there's a couple of things that we can do with that, right? In terms of strategy, you can upgrade your value of your property at that point. You have more equity, increased equity that's available to put into other properties that you're considering purchasing at that point. And then it really brings in a very higher value property by improving your portfolio of the properties that you currently own. Another thing that I feel is that you can diversify your portfolio when you're looking at 1031 exchanges. In terms of exploring new opportunities, 1031 exchange allows you to explore maybe other properties and other markets within the properties itself, and where you can find more profitable investment opportunities, for your portfolio. But I guess one of the biggest things that I would think of in terms of 1031 exchanges also is looking to the future, looking for maybe even estate planning. Now, we're not CPAs, we're not estate planners. So obviously we'll defer that to you in regards to asking the folks that are, within your sphere to answer specific questions, strategies that you might want to employ. But from a transferring wealth standpoint, you can use 1031 exchanges to transfer your investment assets to perhaps your future generations, and while significantly reducing your capital gain strategies. So there's obviously a lot, there's preservation of value, preservation of properties, through these. So I'm really excited that, we're going to be having a speaker today that's going to specialize and talk about these. But before I get to Carl, I wanted to quickly talk about, who we are. Singh Commercial Group is based out of San Antonio, Texas. We specialize in brokering hospitality properties, brokering hotels, and then also syndicating passive real estate investments. And we do that with partnering with KW Commercial on the brokerage side, and then also partnering with Spur Equity on the investment side. And we're providing these top-tier services throughout North America. Specifically, our brokerage services, we partner with folks like you, owners who own current hotels, and we're both on the buying side and as well as on the selling side. And then also, we are providing free property evaluations to any hotel owners throughout the country. Because of our affiliation with KW Commercial, we can connect with other agents across the country who specialize in hospitality properties to provide this free evaluation for you. We do list properties, and this is marketing that we do on behalf of hotel owners throughout the country. As well as we sometimes take off-market properties where we understand that some hotel owners may want to restrict going national in terms of marketing these properties because of sensitivity issues through, because of their competition, or sometimes it's family that's involved. So, case by case basis, we do take off market properties. And then, we do have a proven track record of closed deals where we have closed and sold and purchased properties for our clients. Typically, these are mid-scale and full-scale properties. Sometimes we do get to some other types of properties within the hospitality sphere itself, but for the most part, these are hotel properties that we are buying and selling based, for our clients itself. My name is Rav Singh. I am also based out of San Antonio, Texas. I'm the National Hospitality Division Leader at KW Commercial. So one of my privileges and one of my jobs is to really bring a community closer together on the commercial side within Keller Williams, especially folks who are wanting to learn and broker hotels throughout the country. So we do a lot of education, we do a lot of masterminding, and understanding really how to provide these top tier services to list properties and to work with buyers specifically who are looking to purchase hotels. And so I do that through KW Commercial and through Spur Equity. I also purchase and provide these services to our folks who are very busy professionals like you, people who are in business already, folks who are already, either owning hotels or owning other businesses, or professionals, folks who are, maybe doctors or lawyers or other professionals out there that are very involved in their day-to-day job, what they do, but they are looking to passively invest in real estate. So we purchase and we deploy capital in multifamily, in self-storage. And as of recent couple of weeks ago, we are bringing a couple of Marriotts and a couple of Hiltons to our passive investors. So if you are passively wanting to invest in real estate, then just reach out to us, and I'll be more than happy to have individual conversations with you at that point to see what you're looking for and how we can grow and preserve your capital. We have been recognized by Crexi platform and CoStar as top brokers within the region who are providing these services to our clients. And today, it is my privilege and my honor to bring to you guys Carl Pikus. Carl is a seasoned professional. He works at one of the top qualified intermediary firms called Investment Property Exchange Services, also known as IPX 1031. He's an invaluable asset to real estate investors like yourself, realtors, lenders, agents, tax advisors, in the realm of just really understanding 1031 exchange rules and regulations. And in his prior life, he's been involved in DSTs and also in tenant in common TICs as a wholesaler. Carl's financial planning expertise enables him to be a very strategic, comprehensive, tax-deferred 1031 solution provider that I think all of us can learn from him and better understand. So he's going to really dive deep into what 1031 exchanges are. I think you and I, we've all heard about 1031s. Our clients have used 1031. You guys are perhaps already in a 1031 exchange right now. So Carl's going to give a perspective of what that involves and what the rules might be and what other things we can use to benefit these exchanges for us and our families. With that said, I'm going to give the floor to you, Carl, where you can introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about your background in more depth, and let us know more about 1031 exchanges.
All right. Wow, thank you very much. That was a very generous introduction. I wish my wife were here to hear that. All right, I have to, I'm going to try to share my screen.
Okay.
And that's the one I want. And I'm hoping that everyone can see the start of a PowerPoint with some buildings and a green background or
Perfect.
green.
You can see it.
Very good. All right. All right. I think this is working. I'm very optimistic going forward. All right. Before I hit the next slide, yes, name is Carl Pikus. I'm with IPX 1031, and I have been in the industry for over 20 years. I work for IPX. It is the nation's largest qualified intermediary. We do more 1031 exchanges than any other company in the nation. We're currently sitting on about $9 billion of U.S. exchange money. I think the key to our success or our market share as a company is the fact that we are the largest company. We're owned by Fidelity National, which is a Fortune 350 publicly traded insurance company. It's a $9 billion insurance company. So our financial strength is self-evident. And when we do exchanges for our clients, when the money comes to us, we immediately put it in the bank. We set up our client's own separate segregated bank account using their social security number to identify the account. But we'll use banks like Citi, Wells, Chase, Fifth Third, Capital One, large institutional banks, set up their own separate segregated bank account, and then our parent will insure the account. $100 million Fidelity bond from Lloyd's of London, $50 million third-party insurance, $30 million errors and omissions. We believe our market share is due to those reasons. It's our financial strength and the fact we apply more insurance than any other QI company when we're handling our exchanges on behalf of our clients. So I just wanted to point that out before we got going.
Awesome.
Right.
Thank you.
Let's hope that this works. Okay. All right. Very good. All right. We're talking for perhaps 45 minutes, 50 minutes or so. And these are the big macro bullets that I want to discuss. Recent changes to 1031. It's a political year. And ordinarily, I mean, it's only every 2 years or so that we have something to announce politically, but this year is very important. I do have something to announce politically, so I'll come back to this one.
Okay.
1031 rules review, that's really the bulk of what we'll discuss with regards to this session. The basics of 1031 exchanges. I will discuss the different types of 1031 exchanges. Also defining like-kind real property, what you can exchange into and what you can exchange out of. And then certainly the rules of the 1031 exchange, setting up the exchange, the actual timetable exchange, 45 days to identify replacement properties, 180 days to close the replacement properties. We will discuss all that. And not just the rules, but the economics behind the rules, because that's truly what drives this more than anything else. If you bought a property for $1 million and 10 years later it was worth $3 million and you've got a gain of $2 million and a tax hit of at least $400,000, you are definitely someone eligible to do an exchange and probably should do an exchange. And it really is the math that drives this. The rules are important. They must be followed. The real estate is important. That's what you're buying and selling. But what drives this is the math. And I always touch on that more than anything else. The economics of the exchange is what's going to motivate you to do the exchange. And it does lead to obviously greater wealth growth, because if you are buying and selling your real estate and not paying taxes on it, by default, your portfolio of real estate is going to grow almost exponentially because it's not getting taxed. So we'll touch on that. Advanced issues in 1031, if I can get to it towards the end, a couple things really related to hotel and motel. Exchanging personal property within your exchange, that's important because there's typically a lot of personal property within hotel and motel. I want to discuss that and how it works with the exchange. Cost segregation as well. If you do cost segregation studies, which is something to consider because there's potentially a better tax break with cost segregation studies, I want to discuss that as well and how it mixes with the things that you need to understand when doing 1031 exchanges with cost segregation. So if I can get to that, we will. Back to the top slide, recent changes to 1031. I'm going to preface what I'm about to say by, I'm not partisan here. Democrat, Republican, don't care. I represent the industry, the commercial real estate industry, more than anything else. And I think everyone on the call is in the commercial industry as well. And it's important to address this. As it relates to 1031, I've got an email from one of the past presidents from the FEA. The FEA is the Federation of Exchange Accommodators. It's the 1031 Association, National Association. It's our means of lobbying Capitol Hill. And obviously commercial has that as well. We're talking about all the commercial players lobbying pretty much the same way that we are, wanting to keep 1031 exchanges. And this would include the AAHOA, Asian American Hotel Owners Association, which from our lobbyists, we have been told that association punches much greater than its weight is in terms of money, time, and effort. They're on Capitol Hill as much as we are, making sure that our interests, commercial real estate interests, are looked after, specifically 1031. AHAA, American Hospitality Alliance, same thing. These are a variety of groups that join us to hit Capitol Hill to lobby for 1031. So let me get back to what John Wunderlich, past president of Federation of Exchange Accommodators, wrote just a couple of weeks ago. On August 19th, 2024, the Democratic Party released its 2024 platform, calls for the repeal of 1031 exchanges, referring to them as a tax loophole, and characterized the Tax Cut and Jobs Act as being a tax scam. This is a step up from the Biden proposal 4 years ago to cap 1031 exchanges at $500,000 per taxpayer. So the bottom line is we haven't seen this before. They are actively looking to get rid of 1031 exchanges. As it relates to Republicans, they haven't really announced anything, but we don't anticipate anything like that. They've never really lobbied to get rid of 1031 exchanges. But it's very important that everyone is aware of that with regards to the industry. And not only get rid of 1031 exchanges, but eliminate the step up in cost basis, which is the end game to doing 1031 exchanges. You keep exchanging and exchanging, deferring. You, the taxpayer, pass away. Your heirs, your kids, get a step up in cost basis. At that point, with the step up in cost basis, if they sell a year or two after your passing, there's very little gain. Your kids can cash out of their ownership. Very little gain, very little taxes. And that's always, what we refer to when we're talking about the economics of 1031 exchanging. We in the industry call it swap to you drop. You keep doing this and doing this, you stop paying taxes. But if the IRS, if the Democrats get their way, it appears they want to eliminate the step up in cost basis and get rid of 1031 exchanges, which would hurt our industry. What would that mean exactly? Much I'll begin with what would that mean to the government? Ironically, it may be counterintuitive, but if you got rid of 1031 exchanges and the government felt that more tax revenue would come in, probably the opposite would happen. People would look at their tax situation and say, look, I'm not going to sell. I'm going to keep this property because I'm not going to pay the taxes. And then potentially, if they don't get rid of the step up in cost basis, when they die is probably when they would sell. But the point is, it would really mess up the market. If there's no 1031 exchanges, and the value of your real estate investment is also tied to the fact that you anticipate selling and exchanging and getting the tax break, then wouldn't the values of the real estate go down? And like I said before, if get rid of 1031 exchanges, will people be less likely to sell? Again, push the value of real estate down. So there's a variety of reasons why we're fighting this. And I think the whole industry is, in locked arms, going to Capitol Hill and reminding, the Democrats on the Hill, if this is indeed what they want to do, you're going to potentially really mess up the real estate market, and not just the commercial market. They call it a tax break, a tax loophole, tax breaks for the rich. This is not true. We do exchanges all the time. I would say 2/3 of our exchanges are mom and pop exchanges. Mom and pop saving, a few $100,000 or so on their real estate investment. Yes, big business and big commercial does exchanges, and perhaps they, save or defer millions, tens of millions of dollars. That's a smaller piece of it. And the nice thing about exchanges is it covers all areas of commercial, whether it's simple mom and pop exchanges or big business. And like I said before, when you look at it from a volume standpoint, we do more exchanges on mom and pops than we do big time commercial. So,
Really helps people like you and I then. I mean, at the end of the day, we may not be exchanging millions and millions of worth of property, but it does help for us to move forward to the next level.
oh, without a doubt. I mean, I work out of Austin, Texas, and the east side of Austin has always been the working class section of Austin. And the way Austin has expanded over the past 20 years, 20 years ago, you could have bought a rental house on the east side of Austin for $60,000, and now it's worth $500,000. And you look at that gain of $400,000 and $80,000-$90,000 tax hit for working class people. That's a disaster.
Hmm.
1031 saves them from that. And you get into the idea, well, why shouldn't working class people who perhaps lucked into the Austin and other cities like that are doing quite well, why would you hurt them with a tax hit like that? I've got several examples of situations like that where mom and pops working class folks, yes, they want to save the $80,000. They need to save the $80,000. They are working class people. So yes, I get very passionate about this. Anyone who
Right.
calls looking to discuss 1031 exchanges, and if there is some way to do this properly and save taxes, that is good for the taxpayer.
Right.
And that's what I'm interested in.
Right. Ultimately, yeah, exactly.
Okay, let me move on to the next slide, and let's talk about. There it is. Okay. These are the different types of 1031 exchanges. You have the simultaneous, the delayed, the build to suit, the reverse build to suit. And so I'll start with the simultaneous and give you a quick history of 1031 exchanges. The first type of 1031 exchange was a simultaneous exchange, and it began in 1921 when the 1031 section of the IRS code began. And it began because a couple of years prior to that, to pay for World War I, the federal government instituted the first capital gains tax, 5%. So if you bought a property for 50 and you sold it for 150, you have a gain of 100. For the first time in the country's history, you would owe the federal government, in that example, $5,000. U.S. citizens were used to the local and state tax. They had no problem with that, but they did not like this federal tax. And U.S. citizens, being who they are, didn't want to pay this tax and tried to figure out ways to not pay it. And there's a perfectly legitimate way to not pay this tax. And that would be as if I were to go to the closing table and I had a $100,000 farm, and I met up with you, and you had a $100,000 piece of property, and you wanted my farm and I wanted your land. We went to the closing table and we simply swapped deeds. Money was transacted in that example. Money triggers the tax. We just completed what is a $200,000 real estate transaction, a big time real estate transaction, but I didn't take your money and you didn't take my money. And the way it works is that transaction cannot get taxed. And that is the entire nature of the simultaneous exchange. The IRS had to recognize that people throughout the country were saying, look, I have a $500,000 property and you have raw land for roughly $500,000. Why don't we find each other and swap, and therefore won't have to pay the taxes on it? And that's how it worked. IRS had to acknowledge through the creation of the 1031 section of the code that these transactions that U.S. citizens were doing were perfectly fine. And when you do them, you can have these simultaneous transactions and defer the taxes. And that's the way it started. And that was in the 1920s. And that's the way it was up until the 1980s. And then the delayed exchange came into being. The delayed exchange ushered in the modern era of 1031 exchanges. Delayed exchange started with a case called Starker. Starker argued to the IRS that their failed simultaneous exchange was within the spirit of the law 100% and within the letter of the law 99%. Starker's simultaneous exchange was disallowed because it didn't happen simultaneously. For whatever reason, the purchase or the acquisition of their replacement property was delayed. It didn't happen simultaneously. So the IRS disallowed the exchange. Starker wrote a formal letter to the IRS and said, wait a minute, we intended to do a simultaneous exchange. That was our intention. Why is it so important that it absolutely has to happen simultaneously? I mean, is it really that important? And to the IRS's credit, it took that criticism. It took them 10 years, but they developed the rules for the delayed exchange, the modern era of 1031 exchanging, which is really what we're going to talk about most during the course of the hour. The delayed exchange is this. First of all, when you're exchanging, it has to be business or investment property. It can be nothing but business or investment property. So if you recognize that you're selling a business or investment property and you bought it for $1 million, you're going to sell it for $3 million, you've got a gain of $2 million, you've got a tax problem, because taxes on the capital gains, they're going to be anywhere between 15 and 23.8%. And then the depreciation recapture tax, the one that everybody forgets, depreciation recapture tax is 25%. And that's just the federal. There are 9 states that have no state tax. Texas is one of them, but the rest of them do have a state capital gains tax. The highest being California, 13.3. Hawaii's next at about 12. New York, New Jersey, Oregon, about 10. The average is 5. So if you're in one of those states, you can begin adding on anywhere from 5 to maybe 10% on average in terms of what your tax hit will be. So the delayed exchange is the idea of selling investment property. You're going to buy investment property. You want to defer the taxes. Those are the taxes. And in the delayed exchange situation, when you sell the property, you need a qualified intermediary. Qualified intermediary is the IRS, the term the IRS uses to describe and define who the 1031 facilitator is. So upon the sale of the relinquished property, you need a QI at the close to sign exchange docs. When the exchange docs are signed, the exchange would begin at close. Buyer brings the money for the sale. Docs are signed. Title or the attorney takes the funds, knows not to give the money to the seller, knows to give the money to the QI. So the qualified intermediary is going to hold the money for up to 180 days. Taxpayer has 45 days to identify replacement properties. They have the balance of 6 months to close the replacement properties. And that is the outline of the delayed exchange, easily the most popular exchange. And it's the taxes that drive that. Those 2 taxes, capital gains tax, depreciation, recapture tax, the possibility that there's going to be a state tax on top of that. It's the math that you do on the front end that's going to drive this. What is my tax hit if I don't exchange it? If I'm sickened by the idea they're going to write a check to the IRS for $250,000, then you need to talk to a QI and begin the process of arranging for the 1031 exchange and being aware of what you need to buy. That's the most important thing.
All right.
So that's the delayed, and we'll discuss that more in detail. But these other 3 exchanges.
Let me ask a quick question on that, Carl. So, I own a hotel. To give an example, I sell the hotel, and I made whatever money that I made. Is there opportunity where I can decide later on and I can take that money and put it in my bank account, and then tomorrow I wake up and say, no, I should have really done a 1031, and then call you at that point and say, hey, can I still do a 1031?
The answer is no. And that's why the planning is important. When the property that you're selling closes, if you didn't have 1031 docs signed that day of the close or before, then there's no possibility of going back and starting an exchange after that.
Right.
So that is important. It's that you're prepared. And the other thing is this: when you think of these rules, when you start the exchange, 45 days to identify replacement properties, 6 months to close. The 6 months to close is reasonable, but having only 45 days to find the property, that's where people fail. And the faster or the quicker that you begin to address this, and that would mean, addressing the sale of your relinquished property and preparing for an exchange at least when the property that you're selling goes under contract. Because you got to prepare 1031 docs, prior to the close. At that point, you've got to get serious. If your relinquished property is under contract, you'd contact us and we'd prepare for the close of your relinquished property. But it's at that point where all your energy really needs to go to the purchase of your replacement property. Only 45 days to identify. And those rules are rock solid. The IRS doesn't play. When they say 45 days to identify, 180 days to close, there's no fudging that. The point I'm making is when the property that you're selling goes under contract, all energy must go to the finding of the replacement property in order to be successful with the exchange.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for explaining that, because I know that's a confusion that some people do have out there. And I just wanted to make sure if there was any way possible that of you could do that, then that would be great. But seems like that's not.
That is not there is one way to do it. If you were to do that, you would have to contact title and the buyer of your property and ask them to rescind the close and reclose it. If you can get that done and totally rescind and the initial close, and ask for a reclose, then we could do it. More often than not, your buyer is not going to do that. He's not going to want to touch that at all.
All right. Thanks for the clarification.
Sure. These other exchanges, build-to-suit, reverse build-to-suit, they are more complicated exchanges and more expensive exchanges. I should add that a regular delayed exchange, the most popular exchange, is typically about $1,500 to sell one property and buy one property. It's a drop in the bucket. The fee comes out of the funds and not out of the taxpayer's pocket. Very simple, very inexpensive. These other ones are much more expensive, and they're not simple. They're more complicated. I'm going to start with the reverse. I'm going to focus on that. Reverse exchange is really what it sounds like. It's doing it backwards. Ordinarily, with the delayed exchange, you sell the relinquished property. We, the QI, hold the money 6 months to buy replacement properties. And I'd say about 95% of the exchanges are delayed exchanges. But these reverses are getting more popular. And that is when you're going to buy the replacement property first. Buy the replacement property first, and then you've got 180 days to sell your relinquished property. The barriers to entry on a reverse, one I just alluded to, it's a lot more expensive. It's no longer a $1,500 exchange. That exchange fee will be anywhere from $7,000 to about $12,000 or $14,000. It depends on the size of the deal and a variety of other little factors. So it's a lot more expensive. But granted, a lot more expensive, but not that much. If you have a $250,000 tax hit and you need to do a reverse, I mean, you'd prefer to do a delayed exchange for $1,500, but if you do a reverse for $10,000 and you still save $210,000 in taxes, then a reverse exchange still makes a lot of sense. So barriers to entry in the reverse, I mentioned it's more expensive. The other is the fact that if you're going to do a reverse, buy the replacement property first. That means you haven't sold the relinquished property. So you have to have the funds to buy the replacement property first. Do you have the cash to buy it? Do you have a line of credit to buy the property? Only then could you consider doing a reverse exchange. And a lot of people do them. If you can get the line of credit, if you have the cash, it's a terrific way of doing business, because basically if you're doing a reverse, you're solving the biggest problem when doing an exchange, and that's buying the replacement property. When you're doing a reverse, if you've got the money to do it, you're no longer tied to the 45 days. You're doing a reverse, you start looking for the property that you want, whether it takes you 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. Find the replacement property that you want. You're going to contact us. We're going to go to the close. We're going to create an LLC on your behalf. You're going to the close as if you're going to buy it. You're going to have the money to buy it. But when you sign reverse exchange docs, you're actually going to sign the purchase to us in our LLC. It has to be that way. You need a third party to buy that property, because ultimately you cannot exchange with yourself. So at the close of a reverse, we'll buy the replacement property for you. And then you've got 180 days to sell the relinquished property. 6 months to sell the relinquished property. Assume you sell the relinquished property within 6 months. When it does close, the relinquished property is the taxable event. Those funds are potentially taxed. So it'll close, it'll be held in escrow, and those funds will be used to replace the funds that were temporarily given to us, your third-party exchanger. We'll give you back the money that you temporarily gave to us to buy the property, and we'll give you title to the LLC that we use to buy the property on your behalf. And that's a reverse exchange. And if you've got the money to do that, and the tax hit is big enough to justify the reverse exchange, and you have something very specific that you want to buy, and doing a delayed exchange makes no sense, because you sell your relinquished property, you only have 45 days to find what you're looking for and 6 months to close it. If you're looking for something very specific, a delayed might not be the type of exchange that you want. So the reverses are getting more popular for the reason that I just described. You have something specific that you want in mind, and just the simple fact that there's simply more money out there. We are finding that mom and pop's business are growing to where, yes, they do have the money to buy their replacement property first and execute a more expensive reverse exchange, but it makes sense for them because they have something very specific in mind that they want to buy.
So Carl, I actually have 2 clients who are doing that right now. Doing the reverse exchanges. So how does debt play into this then? If I'm the guy who's looking to buy the next property and I'm going to do a reverse exchange where I'm going to buy the property, am I contacting a lender and getting money from the from the bank, and then the bank sending that money to you directly to purchase that property? Or most of the time when you're looking at reverse exchanges, you're seeing cash sales?
Both, actually. It just depends. It can be a cash sale, it can be a line of credit. If our taxpayer has access to a lender who understands how to do this, and that is the key. There's no problem with borrowing to pull this off from our standpoint, from taxpayer standpoint. The problem comes with the lender when our taxpayer calls the lender, calls Citi, and talks to some 25-year-old kid and
Yeah.
begins to describe this, and the
Yeah.
kid's head explodes because
Yeah.
they're not checking all the boxes. I mean, the irony there is this is a safe loan for the lender because you have two properties as collateral, the one that you're going to sell and the one that you're going to own within 180 days.
Right.
That is the problem. We know of lenders here locally, throughout Texas and throughout the country who are familiar with this. We just have to make sure that if you need the loan, that you find the lender who understands how to do this. But to answer your question, no, you can always use a lender. That's not a big deal. And then
Yeah.
when the exchange is over, when the relinquished property closes, and the relinquished property, that's the taxable dollars, that money will replace the money that was temporarily given to us by the taxpayer. If the taxpayer owes the lender part of that money, that's fine.
Mhm.
And then ultimately what we're talking about here on a reverse exchange is just a short-term loan.
Right. Right. I got it. Okay. That's great. That's a great option for people who um, don't want to be bound to a timeline, seems like, right? I mean, you only have 6 months to close on a property. You have to find a property before that. You got to identify it in 45 days. And so if you're looking for something very specific, you can always purchase a property and then do a reverse on it. It's a great option. I don't think a lot of people are familiar with it. I think people need to understand that a little bit better, and especially a lot of agents that are on the call, and then of course a lot of owners that are already on the call itself. I think that's a great option for them to consider this exchange.
It is. When it comes to mom and pops in this, you could imagine mom and pops exchanging hotels, starting modestly $500,000. And over the course of their 30, 40-year career, they're going to cash out. They've deferred the entire time. They're going to sell a property, their hotel motel, for $3.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
And we know what they want to go into. They want to go into a fabulous condo in Vail or something like that.
Right.
And this happens all the time with it doesn't matter. Docs, it doesn't matter. Fabulous condo in Vail. They've deferred all this time. They're going to retire. You can't do a delayed exchange and find the exact fabulous condo in Colorado for
Right.
$2.5 million,
Of course.
$3 million.
Of
You
course.
just can't do it. You've got to do the reverse exchange.
Right, right.
So,
And does this have to be only in the US? Can I find something in other countries that have maybe a treaty with the US?
no, and that's too bad. We're lobbying to do that. The way the IRS has it set up is domestic exchanges, US for US exchanges, have to be that way. Domestic for domestic, foreign for foreign. But it doesn't kind of answer your question. Can I have a foreign property that has tremendous capital gains and a US tax problem and exchange it? And the answer is yes. The problem is if you have foreign property to exchange, you have to buy foreign property. And that's another thing we're lobbying, Capitol Hill, both Republicans and Democrats arguing and say, look, US taxpayer is granted the ability to defer taxes on foreign property. Doesn't it make sense to make it easier for them to bring the money back into the United States? We're still working on that.
Yeah. One question on this specifically is, do both transactions need to occur under the same corporation or the same LLC?
Yes, ultimately, the relinquished property taxpayer must be the taxpayer who takes ownership of the replacement property. And granted, we will have bought the replacement property on behalf of the taxpayer, and that is an LLC that ultimately we will just assign to the taxpayer who sold the relinquished property. Taxpayer can, decide to put it in the name of the relinquished property or decide to put the LLC under the name of the relinquished property. It's ultimately up to them.
Okay. One other question before you move on, and that would be that in the event that 1031 deferred funds are not used, not all the funds are used for the exchange, can the remaining funds be used for improvements like lighting, ceiling, fans, whatever? How does that work? Even
Yeah,
after even
sure.
after you close on the property, but before the 180-day period?
Well, you'd be doing what is known as a build-to-suit exchange. So it's similar in that
Okay.
if we're doing a reverse build-to-suit exchange, meaning we're going to buy the property for you, and then you've got 6 months to close on your relinquished property. We would buy the property for you, and obviously you have the money to give to us to buy the property. But if you have excess money and you want to improve that property over the course of the 180 days, you can do that. And again, a more expensive exchange, it's going to be the $7 to $12 to $14,000 to do the build-to-suit exchange. But yes, you can do that. What you're looking at there when you're talking about it, and more or less these exchanges are $7,000 to $10,000. They don't typically go beyond that. So I always ask, the taxpayers, I'll say, look, this is a more expensive exchange. It's going to cost you about $8,000. How much money in terms of improvements can you make on that property within the 180 days? And if
All
they
right.
say 1,000 or less, I'll say it probably wasn't worth it. I'm going to charge you another $8,000 for $50,000 of improvements. $50,000 of tax deferred money at 20% is about $10,000. It doesn't make much sense. If someone says, I'm confident I can put in at least $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 in the 180 days, I'll say that makes perfect sense. Yes, it's a more expensive exchange, but if you can make that kind of improvement using exchange money, then that's definitely worthwhile. You're going to save a lot in the exchange.
Makes sense. And in the LLC that you make, especially when you're buying a property, let's say the shareholders are two people. With the new LLC, obviously it'll have to be the same shareholders because you're really buying new property. You're opening up that new LLC, and when you sell the other property, you relinquish it. That do those shareholders need to be the same?
They do,
Yeah.
because what you're describing is a partnership here.
Mhm.
So if you do that, then yes, I mean, the partnership that's sold is ultimately going to be the partnership that buys. However, you can play with that if you have an attorney who knows what they're doing. You could potentially, if someone says, look, I'm one of three partners here, I have my third, I got to get out of this. There are ways of doing that and still executing the exchange in the partnership. Perhaps one of the or both partners in the three-partner partnership could buy out, the third partner, and just the partnership stays the same, but now it's no longer three guys, it's two guys. Or perhaps another third party says, I'll buy the third guy's, the guy who wants to get out, I'll buy him out. With a good attorney, they're just repositioning the partners within the partnership. And the IRS doesn't care because the partnership remained intact. So with a good QI, with good attorneys, there are ways of looking at this to ultimately satisfy all the partners, the ones who want to exchange, the one who potentially want to get out.
Yeah. And Carl, can you use these funds to put earnest money? So you've already sold the property. You guys are keeping our money, right? And now I
Yes,
identified the next property, and I got to put down earnest money. Can I use the funds from there for the earnest money?
definitely. We need about 2 days to prepare the wire. So anyone who calls and does that, I'll say, okay, you got the contract for the property. You need earnest money. It's due in 2 days. Send me the contract. Give me the name of the closer at the title company. We'll arrange a wire with your exchange money. We'll wire that money into the title company for the property that you intend to buy.
Great. Sorry, go on. I know I'll keep on asking these questions time and time, but please go on with
Okay,
your presentation.
you got it. All right, like-kind real property. This is the slide that described what you can exchange into and out of. So I'll get calls from mom and pops who say, I'm selling a rental house, I'm selling a motel. Like-kind must mean I've got to buy a rental house or I have to buy a motel. And the answer is yes, you can buy a rental house, you can buy a motel. But like-kind is as broad as real estate. You can buy anything you want as long as it's used for business or investment purposes. So you've got pictures there of office, manufacturing, 30-year plus leases, raw land, retail, ag, mixed use apartments, et cetera, et cetera. It all works. You are selling business or investment property. You can buy any type, any category of business or investment property. It all works. It's very simple, in fact. We'll do exchanges on subsets of the dirt. We'll do exchanges on air rights, water rights, mineral rights. You can do that. There are a couple securities you can exchange into. DSTs, Delaware Statutory Trusts, can be exchanged into. They are REIT-like investments. You know, we're based in Texas, oil and gas royalties. You can exchange into oil and gas royalties all you want. And so the point of this slide is you've got the entire universe of real estate to exchange into. And odds are when you're exchanging, regardless of where you are in your career, you should be able to find something that is suitable. I mentioned the DSTs. DSTs are popular with retirees, people who want to get out of it. Because if you go into a DST, you don't have to manage, you get the benefits of the exchange and the tax break, and you pull income for your retirement years. It's a really nice solution. So that's what this slide is about. And I'll just quickly go through it. When exchanging, all domestic property held for a qualified use is like kind to all domestic property held for a qualified use. That's pretty simple. By domestic, we touched on this. Anywhere in the United States, including District of Columbia, Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands, Samoa, Northern Mariana Islands. So if you sell in Texas, you buy in Maine, fine. Sell in Maine, buy in D.C., fine. Sell in D.C., buy in the U.S. Virgin Islands, fine. All 50 states, all U.S. territories. One exception is Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is neither a state nor a territory. It's a commonwealth. You cannot exchange into and out of Puerto Rico. And another thing that we're lobbying Congress on, both Republicans and Democrats, you know, why not just include Puerto Rico? We're still working on that.
Okay.
Anywhere in the United States, and then real property defined as land and things permanently attached to the land. Nothing easier than that. Right. And then the qualified use. When selling investment property in a 1031 exchange situation, it indeed has to be investment property. And so this qualified use officially is investment or productive use in a trade or business. When you have those characteristics, that is a property that is 1031 eligible.
Okay. Can this be where, you know, if I have a property under one business and I want to, you know, use that funds towards paying off another business, another property, can that be possible?
No, that question comes up all the time, though.
Okay.
1031 will always begin with the sale of a property and the purchase from a third party. And you can never use exchange money to pay off a property that you already own or improve a property that you already own.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to skip this one because I want to get to a better one. We talked about the rules of the exchange. We touched on it a little bit. I want to go into a little bit more detail. Exchange will begin. And by the way, we've established that it's a business or investment property, selling a business investment property, buying business investment property. The property goes under contract. I can definitely begin because the QI needs the contract and the title commitment or the deed in order to draft 1031 docs. So when it goes under contract, I can begin, and the exchange will begin upon the sale. At the sale of the relinquished property, qualified intermediary will hold the money. The day after the close starts this timetable. Okay. 45 days to identify, 180 days to close. Those are calendar days. Holidays and weekends count. So if your 180th day fell on a Monday, July 4th, odds are your business probably needs to be done on day 177, July 1st, in anticipation that that entire weekend, you know, title and attorneys, you know, won't be there.
Will be closed, yeah.
Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So this is important. The IRS doesn't play with that. There are no extensions to these rules. It's calendar days. Your 45th day is due on 11:59 of your 45th day. Your close has got to happen at 11:59 of your 180th day. There is one exception, but it's nothing you can control. The one exception is this. It would be a presidential declaration of disaster in either the county you are buying or selling in. And if that is the case, then the IRS will allow you to add 120 days to your 45th day, 120 days to your 180th day.
Kind of like what happened with COVID. I think there was some stuff that was going on during COVID.
There was at that March or by March or April of COVID when it really hit in 2020.
Mhm.
I think virtually the entire country got it. I
Right.
think all of Texas got it,
Right.
and they got the 120 days added to the 45 and the 120 days added to the 180.
Mhm.
Really, what you have here are flooding, hurricanes, massive
Yeah.
fires, mudslides, and things like that. It depends on the state, that you're in. When you're on the
Right.
Gulf Coast, you can expect some of these. The counties by the coast, they're going to get it. If
Right.
you're in California, depending on the year and the rain, you have mudslides and earthquakes. It just depends. So it's there, but it's nothing you can count on.
Right. Exactly. So to reiterate, 45 days to identify and 180 days to exchange, and that 180 days includes that 45-day ID period. This is total 180 days we're talking
Total
about.
of 180 days, exactly. So when the
Okay.
45 days hits, you've got the balance. You've got 135 days left.
Left. Okay.
And you can begin to see that it's the 45 days that is the problem, not 6 months to close. It's the
Right.
45 days that's the problem.
Right. Right.
The next slide.
Somebody asked a question, can sale of more than one rental property possibly for exchange with another commercial property? So can
Yes,
you
excellent
combine it?
question. I forgot to bring it up. Can you sell several properties in exchange and buy one? Yes, absolutely. Can you sell one property in exchange and buy several in an exchange? Yes, absolutely. You can do that.
Okay.
It's really your issue with, several properties is timing. Because when
Mhm.
the first one sells, that'll establish the timeline.
Right.
So if the first one sells, you have 45 days to identify, 180 days to close.
Okay.
Can your other two properties, let's assume two, sell within, say, a month or so
Mhm.
to add all the money into the exchange? So when you identify in day 45, you have all the money from all three, and your identification will be, what you want it to be. Because obviously in that example, you're going to buy something more expensive.
Right. Right.
All right. When identifying, there are rules behind the identification. And the first rule is simple. Well, let me begin with this. On day 45, the IRS demands that you give to us, the QI, a list of properties. And it's typically 3 properties. I'd say 85% of the time our exchanges are giving us the list of 3 properties. And the reason behind that is 2 reasons. One is most people just want to buy one property. So having 2 as a backup makes perfect sense. The other reason is there's literally a rule in the IRS code called the 3 property rule. And it's very simple. If you identify 3 properties or up to 3 properties, it doesn't matter what their value is, you can close on any 1, 2, or all 3 of those properties. Easiest rule to work with. If you identify 3 properties, the IRS doesn't care. They'll never audit you. To emphasize the value of any properties, I have a picture of the Sears Tower or the Empire State Building. 3 properties, any value, close on any 1, 2, or all 3 properties. No issues with the IRS. It's the easiest rule to follow. So what happens when our clients have more than 3 properties to identify because they want to buy more than 3 properties?
Mhm.
You can buy, or you can identify 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 properties. That's fine. But as soon as you identify the 4th property, you're out of the 3 property rule and you're in what they call the 200% rule.
Yeah.
So taxpayer can identify 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 properties, but he's got to give us the QI, the estimated value of each one of those properties, add up the estimated value of each one of those properties, and be sure it's not more than 200% or double the value of their relinquished property.
Okay.
So this is getting more complicated now. So I'll give you a simple example. If we sold for $100,000 and our client, our taxpayer, wanted to identify 8 teeny tiny lots of land at $25,000 a piece, their total value added up is $200,000. And that's exactly double the $100,000 that they sold. So in this example, they've identified 8 tiny lots of land, total value $200,000. They can close on any 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or all 8 of those properties. Really, what you're looking at when you do the math is in the 200% rule. Anytime you use the 200% rule, obviously you're buying several properties whose value is considerably less than what you sold, because under the 200% rule, when you identify it, you got to tally up the value of all those properties and be sure they're not more than double what was sold. Another way of looking at it is if someone says, I'm selling for $500,000 and I'm looking to buy a property or 2 for $500,000 or greater, I know immediately that they're in the three property rule. They're in the three property rule because they're going to identify, roughly three properties whose value is about $500,000, and they sold for $500,000. There's no possibility they could use the 200% rule and identify a fourth or a fifth property.
Right.
It's by default. When you start adding those up, they're well over their 200% rule. It simply won't work. 200% rule only works when looking to buy several properties whose value is considerably less than what was sold. And then you can start playing with the 200% rule.
Okay. Another question. And by the way, everybody, you guys are doing great. Putting questions in the chat. As I get to it, I'll have Carl answer those. And Carl, time check. I mean, we're almost to the top of the hour. Do you have a few more minutes?
I do.
Yeah. Stay a little longer. So we'll just keep going for another 10, 15 minutes. If anybody has to leave, we'll get them the presentation. But if you guys can stay, we can answer these questions. And I know you still have a few more slides to go. A question that came in was that if you have, for example, a loan of 100,000, can you pay off the loan and have no loan on the new property?
No, you'd have to make up for the loan payoff. Because a lot of times, taxpayers will call in and say, look, I'm selling for $500,000 and I owe the bank $100,000. And I'll say, okay, if you want a total tax deferred exchange, you're going to buy for $500,000 or greater. And so what does that mean? Upon the sale of the $500,000, immediately the bank gets $100,000. And in simple math, we'll have $400,000 in the exchange. And in order to have a total tax deferred exchange, you've got to use all the cash from the sale. If you take any cash out, it gets taxed.
Mm-hmm.
Take any cash out, it gets taxed. And people, understand that. But it's also true of the debt payoff. People say, well, the bank owns that part of it. No, it doesn't. The bank helped you own it, and you're the taxpayer, and it's your tax obligation.
All right.
So it's sold for 500, 400 cash goes into the exchange, 100 went to the bank. And so in order to have a whole total tax deferred exchange, if you don't want to pay any taxes, you'll use all 400,000 as a down payment to buy your replacement property.
Right.
But you've got to come up with the $100,000 one of two ways, three ways. One is you could have cash to make up for the $100,000. If you have cash, that's fine. Total tax deferred exchange. Or you got to contact a bank to find the $100,000, get a loan for the $100,000 or greater, or some combination of those things. You could have cash to add to the purchase and perhaps not need as much of a loan. But this is what is known as boot. Boot is what the IRS defines as that which is taxable. And taking cash out of the transaction is cash boot. Everyone understands that. You take cash out of the transaction, you took possession of it, you're paying taxes.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also debt boot. Sale of the property, bank got $100,000 in this example. Okay, that's fine. That's potential debt boot, unless you add that $100,000 to the purchase of your replacement property. And if you don't, if it's just cash, you sold for 500, you bought for 400, that debt boot is going to get taxed.
Taxed on it, right? Okay.
All right. This is my favorite slide. This is an idea, the conversation I will have with anyone who calls, whether it's a mom and pop selling, $250,000 of land, or it's a big commercial business selling a, $50 million hotel or something like that. So we'll ask, when someone calls, they'll say, look, I talked to my CPA. I've gone online a little bit. I think I'm in a 1031 situation. If I sell this property, I think I'm a pretty big tax hit. And I'll say, okay, what exactly are you selling? And he says, I'm selling a rental house. And I'll say, okay, well, rental house is definitely exchangeable. When does it close? What are you selling for? And he says, it's closing in a few weeks. It's selling for $500,000. And I'll say, okay, well, if you've done the math on this, what's your cost basis? More often than not, they don't know. And I'll say, okay, let's try and figure this out. Let's see if you're right about your tax estimate. Tell me what you bought this property for, how long ago that was. And he says, I bought it for $200,000 and I'm going to sell it for $500,000. So right away, I'm interested in this conversation. That's a gain of $300,000. There's your capital gains tax. Without looking at the state tax, that's 15 to 23.8. At 15%, that's 45 grand in capital gains. Mm-hmm. At 20%, that's $60,000 in capital gains. So this is a conversation I want to have. But if he bought a property years ago, let's say he bought it 14 years ago, it's a rental house. Rental houses depreciate to zero between year 27 and year 28. He hasn't made any major capital improvements to the property, then he's depreciated half of it. So I'll ask him that. Make any major improvements to the property? Maintenance doesn't count. We're talking about real capital improvements. And if the guy says no, I'll say, well, you probably depreciated roughly half of it. You bought it for 200, 14 years of depreciation. Your cost basis is 100. So the difference between the 100 and the 200, there's your depreciation recapture tax, 25%. The difference between the 200, what he bought it for and what he's selling for, 500, that difference is 300. There's your capital gains tax. I don't need to know exacts. I'll just roughly figure 20%. Mm-hmm. Cost basis 100, sell for 500, gain of 400, 20%, 80 grand or so. So I'll ask the guy, do you and your CPA figure $70,000, $80,000 in taxes? And the guy says yes. And then I'll say, okay, well, you're definitely exchange eligible. Here's what you need to do to be successful with your exchange. And then I'll go through all the rules, the 45 days, the 180 days, setting this up properly, getting an outline and the things that they need to know so they can be successful at this. And the guy says, I'm aware of that. I'm closing in 2 weeks for $500,000. 2 weeks after that, I'm buying a new rental house for $600,000. And then I'll say, this is beautiful. This is perfect. This outline is excellent. If you complete this outline as you've described, the 80 grand that would have gone to the government won't. It'll be in the principal of your new investment property for $600,000. So that's terrific. Keep in mind, though, it's a tax deferral. The tax is always hanging over their head.
All right.
Let's say he does pull this off. Buys for $600,000, saves the 80 grand. 80 grand doesn't go to the government. It's in the principal of his new property. And then 10 years later, he gets an offer to sell this property for $800,000. It's a good offer, and he takes the offer. And now the capital gains has only gotten worse. He continues to depreciate. Not an $80,000 tax hit, it's a $140,000 tax.
Yeah.
Doesn't want that. Sells the $800,000 property, does a new exchange, buys 2 rental condos, $500,000 apiece for a total of $1 million. Defers the $140,000 in taxes, sits on these 2 condos for $1 million, sits on them for 25 more years. 35 years have passed. The 2 rental condos are worth $1.5 million. His cost basis is effectively zero. He's depreciated all of it. 35 years have passed. Our taxpayer is well into his 60s or 70s. And this is where I alluded to swap till you drop. This is where this comes in. If he's alive and sells these properties, and he can, and he doesn't exchange them, he'll owe the government $350,000. He could sell them and exchange again, that's fine. But what happens when he dies? When he dies, the IRS allows his heirs to get a step up in cost basis. As soon as he dies, the cost basis is set that day for his heirs. Note that this is not a taxable event. There's only a taxable event if he sells the property. He died holding the property. Mm-hmm. His heirs took ownership of the property with a step up in cost basis. Kids' cost basis is $1.5 million. That's the value of the property. And if they sell the property, within a year or two of her passing for 1.5, 1.2, or 1.5, 1.6, they'll have little or no taxes. So that would be the time for the family to cash out.
To sell, right.
Dad's benefit to sell, exactly. Dad's benefit during the course that he was alive is he was buying bigger, better, more expensive properties. They were never getting taxed. His real estate portfolio is growing almost exponentially because it's not getting taxed. Mm-hmm. Theoretically, buying bigger, better, more expensive properties, his rental income should be that much greater. So that was the benefit while he was alive. Clearly, in death, his real estate portfolio is that much bigger to pass on to his kids. His kids can then cash out at that point, sell and cash out. They'd have very little of a tax hit. So that's how it works. I mean, the bad news about this whole thing is for it to work,
somebody has to die. Somebody has to die.
Someone has to die. But the kids will be so much happier as they're putting dad into the ground.
Yeah, but it's so important. I mean, that strategy itself that you just described in the last 5 minutes is what I was talking about earlier in my intro slides, is that it's so important to have that planning done ahead of time, because if it's done properly, if it's done right, you're buying something for 100,000 and you're selling for 1.5 million, the kids are selling and they're almost paying zero taxes just because their step up basis is really, their tax liability is nothing because your dad bought it and depreciated it. So it's a great way to build wealth, right? And have that legacy but you have to understand it. And so I think it's very important to have these strategies behind you. There's a few questions that are coming up. Somebody was asking me, can we take this money and invest in new construction?
You can if you do an improvement exchange, a build to suit exchange. So if you were to sell the relinquished property, money comes into the exchange, and you told us, look, we want to buy this raw land and start building on it, then we could do that. We'd create an LLC, we'd take the money from the sale, and we would buy the raw land on your behalf. And then you've got the balance of 180 days to take whatever money's left in the exchange to start your improvements. If that
But
can work for you, then yes.
but does the improvement have to be finished within 180 days?
It doesn't have to be finished, but you're done with the exchange money in 180 days. So,
Uh-huh.
I mean, a good scenario is if you were confident that you had $200,000 left and you quickly had us buy the replacement property or the land or whatever needs to be improved. And then therefore you have almost the full 6 months and you're like, I've got the contractors, I've got the plans. I am confident I can put the first $200,000 of exchange money into the land, make the improvements within the 180 days. And if there's anything left, I can borrow from the bank to finish off the project.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Let's move on.
That is pretty much all I had. I know we're getting close to the time. I did want to address, we talked about a little bit, prior to getting started, personal property with hotel and motel. Because if you're doing an exchange, almost inevitably there's lots of personal property within the motel. And that would include beds, and that would include TVs and things that are not permanently attached, to the property itself. And in order to do that right, you would need a CPA. You should be able to break out the value of the personal property. And ultimately, you cannot exchange that. There might be a tax break for you, or you might have to pay taxes on the personal property. But this is one that comes up with hotel and motel, is that, in order to do this right, by the book, proper CPA to make sure if you ever got audited, you'd be able to break out everything and say, look, this was done properly. And the IRS says, yes, it was done properly. Because if you're exchanging personal property with the real property, and there's a lot of personal property there, and you got audited, it's possible the IRS will look at that, break into the personal property and say, look, you shouldn't have gotten a tax break on that. That was personal property. And that's a pretty big chunk of what you sold and exchanged. So that is always something that owners of those types of properties need to be aware of and do that right. Because ultimately, we cannot advise you. We're qualified intermediaries. Qualified intermediaries are independent third parties to the transaction. We're holding your money, and for that reason, we cannot advise you. Now, that said, we're going to give everyone the outline of everything that you need to do to be successful, and this is one of those things. But ultimately, how you do it, we don't have any control over. And if you do it wrong, then we're gonna pray with you that you're gonna get away with it, because you deserve to get away with it probably. But there's a way of doing it that if you want to be in absolute compliance, you need to be aware of personal property in those types of exchanges.
Absolutely. Carl, I've put your information in the chat box, so I already have that. Everybody has your information in case there's any specific questions that they have. They can reach out to you. I did have a couple of questions I was going to ask you. One, Jason Patel is asking that, say that the next administration that comes in, they decide to scrap 1031 exchanges. Do you think it would be an immediate termination in that tax year? I'm assuming they would set a date, since it would seem unfair for people already in the process of doing a 1031.
Oh, I don't know. They can don't count on that. They can be as nasty as they want to be.
Yeah.
They can make it a little easier and give you a couple years. Keep this in mind. I think it was the late 80s. They retroactively went back prior to that, was like 86 or 87. They retroactively went back like 5 years. The other, there's like a 5-year period, and taxed people prior to that. first of all,
Yeah.
we hope it's not eliminated. And if it is, I
Exactly.
hope you're right that they make it a
Give
little
some
easier.
time. Yeah, right.
You can't count on that. They
Yeah,
can be as nasty as they want to be.
right, right. Yeah, I guess Jason, plan for it, or I guess wait to see what happens. It is something that we hope it never goes away. And Shiva is asking, and we've already touched based on that a little bit. Maybe you can just reiterate that an example that Carl gave when a landlord dies or when somebody passes on, and the property is in an LLC or a trust, and the kids are the new trustees, how would the tax liabilities apply?
Well, they're just going to take ownership. They're the heirs. They'll
They're
be
the
named
heirs.
in the um, when the owner passes. And I don't necessarily, I think they would just simply take ownership of the trust, and the trust remains the taxpayer. I mean, I don't have a good answer for you on this. I mean, this is really, that's something for the attorney handling the estate,
Mhm.
I think, more than anything else. But I mean, there's nothing funky that'll happen here. I mean, there's nothing to be worried about. I just don't necessarily know exactly how they would inherit. I would assume they would inherit in the name of the estate, and the estate's taxpayer, or that ownership by default has got to shift from who was the owner who has passed to how the estate decreed, well, the new owners, the kids, would take ownership of that. It's really more of an attorney question on how the estate attorney is going to handle that. But I can tell you that it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say just definitely consult with your legal or even your CPA, your accountant, to see what advice they give you at that point, for sure. But I think that's all the time that we have today, Carl. I really want to thank you for spending the last almost hour and a half with us, on giving us a better idea of what 1031 exchanges are. And of course, it can get complicated. You have Carl's information. If there's any specific questions you have, please go ahead and reach out to him. He's done a few of my transactions, personal transactions, and he's always available, for information. And I do want to thank everybody who joined the webinar today, for spending time with us. I really appreciate that. Our plan is to do quarterly webinars on different topics as it pertains to not only hotel ownership, but also different things based on strategy, from 1031 exchanges as we're doing today to I think we're going to do cost segregations and the power of accelerated appreciation, what that means to hotel owners and property owners in general in terms of saving money and putting real money in your pocket. So look out for that in the next quarter or so. We'll do that. But on behalf of Sing Commercial and personally on behalf of me, I'd like to thank you, Carl, and then everybody else who attended the webinar today, and really appreciate your time.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. Call your email. It's Carl's email is actually, Mr. Arora, Carl's email is in the information that I put up there. I will do that again. And please do contact him. Thank you very much. Thank you again.
Thanks.